The city felt like it was swallowing itself in the dark. A violent seasonal storm clawed through the streets, dragging sheets of rain sideways, rattling tin roofs, bending old power lines until they wailed. Neon signs flickered, motorbikes vanished into curtains of water, and thunder rolled like distant explosions that never quite stopped. It was the kind of night when people double-locked their doors, pulled their blankets closer, and pretended the world outside didn't exist. But not everyone had a door to close. A young woman pushed herself along the slick sidewalk, almost erased by the rain. Her thin, ripped jacket slapped wildly against her body, soaked all the way through until the fabric stuck to her skin like a second icy layer. Each blast of wind shoved her backward, but her bare feet, red and numb, kept searching for the next patch of pavement. Her knees buckled with every step, yet she refused to fall. On her back, wrapped in a damp scarf that had once been pink, was a little girl no more than 3. The child clung to her shoulders, small arms looped around her neck, cheek pressed weakly against the hollow of her mother's collarbone. Every few breaths, the little girl coughed, a dry, rasping sound that did not belong to someone so small. The woman shifted her grip, cradling the child's legs with both arms, trying to shield her from the wind with the last scraps of fabric she had left. Her name was Lynn. In the harsh glow of a distant streetlight, she looked too fragile to be carrying another life through such a night. Her long dark hair hung in wet ropes across her face, sticking to her lips when she tried to breathe. Her cheeks were sunken, her eyes ringed with purple shadows that spoke of too many nights without sleep. The cheap rubber sandals she had worn had split hours ago, abandoned somewhere near a flooded alley, so now her feet slid on the cold, gritty sidewalk. But she forced her toes to dig in, to keep going. Every breath she took was for the child on her back. Every shaking step was a promise she refused to break. Once, not so long ago, she had walked hospital corridors in clean shoes and a pressed uniform, a nursing student with a scholarship and teachers who said things like, "You're going to be an incredible nurse one day, Lynn. You have both the head and the heart for it." That voice echoed now like it belonged to another lifetime. The storm split open the sky with a jagged bolt of lightning, throwing her shadow across the wet pavement. Thin, trembling, still upright. Through the haze of rain, she saw it, a bus stop shelter, its metal roof glistening, a small rectangle of dim light. Just a bench and a cover, but to her it looked like a miracle, like a place where she might sit and breathe for one full minute without the sky pouring down on them. "Just a little further, Misa," she whispered, lips shaking so hard her words barely formed. "We're almost there, my little star." On her back, the little girl stirred. Her voice was a broken whisper, but clear enough to cut through the storm. "Mommy, you're my hero." Lynn froze mid-step. The words slipped into the cracks of her exhausted heart like warm light, so unexpected that her knees nearly gave out. Tears she didn't have time for filled her eyes and mixed with the rain on her cheeks. A soft, strangled sob escaped her. Not the sound of someone giving up, but of someone who suddenly remembered why she couldn't. She forced herself forward, but the wind chose that moment to roar, slamming into her with the force of a wave. Her foot slipped. The world tilted. Lynn twisted mid-fall, turning her body so her daughter would never touch the ground. Her hip hit the pavement first, a sharp explosion of pain shooting up her side, but she bit down on her cry. Her arms locked around Misa, holding her tight. Cold water rushed over them, seeping into every seam. Lynn dug her fingers into the rough concrete, trying to push herself up. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. For a brief, terrifying second, she wondered if this was where their story ended, in the gutter of an indifferent city. Then through the roar of rain and the pounding in her ears came a new sound, the hiss of tires cutting through water. Headlights swept across her, bright and blinding. A black SUV rolled to a stop at the curb, sleek and impossibly out of place in this forgotten corner of the storm. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out, holding a wide umbrella that bloomed above him like a small, defiant roof against the sky. He walked toward her without hesitation. His coat whipped in the wind, but he didn't flinch. didn't hover at a safe distance the way some people did when they saw trouble. He knelt beside her, lowering the umbrella until it shielded all three of them. Up close, his face was calm, serious, but there was something gentle in his eyes, a warmth that didn't match the cold night. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice steady over the storm. "Please, let me help. It's not safe out here." Lynn stared at him through soaked lashes, every muscle in her body tensed between fear and hope. For a long heartbeat, she said nothing. Her arms tightened around Misa's small legs as if the man might try to take her child away. The storm had taught her that help often came with invisible hooks, that kindness could be a trap. She searched his face for that familiar shadow, pity, disgust, impatience, but found only concern. He didn't grab her. He didn't demand. He simply knelt there in the freezing rain, umbrella tilted over her more than himself, and waited. "My car is just there," he said quietly. "I have heat, blankets, dry seats. Please, let her be warm at least." Lynn's teeth chattered so hard her jaw hurt. Misa coughed against her shoulder, a thin wheeze that made Lynn's heart jolt. The storm raged on around them, but inside the small circle of umbrella, time felt strangely still. Finally, with movements stiff and slow, she gave a tiny nod. The man's shoulders relaxed just a fraction. He shifted his stance and offered his hand, palm open, not reaching, just there. Lynn hesitated, then slid her fingers into his. His hand was warm, steady, and he helped her to her feet as if she weighed nothing at all. Carefully, he walked beside her, matching her unsteady steps, the umbrella following them like a fragile shield as they crossed the flooded curb. The interior of the SUV felt like another universe. As soon as he guided her into the back seat and closed the door, the storm dulled to a distant roar. The leather was cold but dry, the faint smell of coffee and pine cleaner wrapped around her. Within seconds, warm air began to whisper from the vents as the man climbed into the driver's seat and turned on the heater. He reached back, placing a thick, folded blanket beside her, along with a small bottle of water and a clean towel. "Here," he said, his tone calm, almost clinical. "Wrap her first." Lynn's fingers trembled as she unwound the soaked scarf from around Misa's body. The child's skin felt far too hot beneath the chill of the air. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyelids heavy. Lynn patted her forehead dry with the towel, then cocooned her in the blanket, tucking the edges tight as if she could trap warmth itself inside. The man didn't crowd them. He adjusted the mirror so he could see them without turning too much, then rested his hands lightly on the steering wheel. Water ran in thin rivers down the windshield. His dark hair was damp at the temples where the rain had found him, and his coat collar was still wet. He looked like someone who had seen storms before and knew they always ended, even when you couldn't imagine how. "My name is Kai," he said at last, voice softer now. "I won't ask for yours until you feel like telling me." Lynn swallowed. Her attention was on Misa, whose breathing had become shallow, each inhalation a small battle. Lynn pressed the back of her hand to the girl's forehead and flinched at the heat. "She's burning up," she whispered, the words nearly breaking in the middle. Panic rose like a wave in her chest. Kai turned fully, taking in the sight of the child wrapped in his blanket, her lips pale beneath the fever. His expression shifted, focus tightening, worry sharpening his features. "She needs a doctor," he said immediately. There was no hesitation, no calculation, just decision. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb with the smooth certainty of someone used to making fast choices. Rain slapped at the windows. But inside the car, Lynn clutched Misa to her chest and rocked her gently, murmuring broken promises. "Hold on, baby. Please. Just a little longer. Mommy's here. Just breathe, my love." "There's a clinic about 10 minutes from here," Kai said, all eyes on the road, voice kept deliberately calm. "They're open all night. They'll take care of her." She doesn't have insurance," Lynn managed, shame cutting through her fear. "I can't pay. I didn't ask," he replied simply. Something in his tone, flat, unbothered, almost like he was stating the weather, made her fall silent. The city lights smeared into streaks of gold and red on the wet glass as they drove. The clock on the dashboard glowed an unforgiving hour, the kind of time when people usually slept through their worst fears. By the time they pulled into the clinic's small parking lot, lightning was just a flicker on the horizon, the storm beginning to tire. Kai parked near the entrance and was out of the car before Lynn even unbuckled. He opened her door, arms already reaching. Not to take Misa from her, but to help. "May I?" he asked. Her grip tightened for a second, instinctive, then loosened. Carefully, gently, he lifted Misa into his arms, cradling her as if she were made of glass. The little girl's head lolled against his shoulder, her fingers curling unconsciously into the fabric of his shirt. Lynn stumbled beside him, bare feet slapping the cold ground as they hurried through the sliding doors toward whatever waited inside. The clinic's fluorescent lights felt almost violent after the murky glow of the storm. As the doors slid open with a soft hiss, the smell of antiseptic wrapped around them, sharp, clean, familiar in a way that made Lynn's chest ache. Kai strode straight to the reception desk with Misa in his arms while Lynn stumbled beside him, shivering, leaving small wet footprints on the tiled floor. "She's burning up," he said to the nurse, his voice low but urgent. "Fever, cough, difficulty breathing." The nurse took one look at Misa's flushed face and waved them through without the usual questions. Lynn watched as they were guided into an exam room, her mind flickering back to the days when she stood on the other side of this world, wearing scrubs, following orders, measuring vitals with steady hands. Now she was the one shaking in the doorway, powerless. Within minutes, another nurse wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Misa's tiny arm, checked her oxygen levels, fitted a small mask over her nose and mouth. A doctor with tired eyes listened to her chest, frowning at the crackling sounds. Lynn hovered helplessly near the bed, fingers twisting the hem of her wet jacket, afraid to ask, afraid to hear. "It's a mild pneumonia," the doctor said finally, turning toward them. "Serious, but we caught it in time. She'll need fluids, antibiotics, and observation, but she's going to be okay." The room seemed to tilt. Lynn grabbed the side of the bed to steady herself as relief drenched her more completely than the rain ever had. "Thank you," she whispered, voice breaking. Misa, now lying on the narrow hospital bed, blinked sleepily beneath the oxygen mask. Her breathing was already a little easier. An IV line ran from the back of her hand to a clear bag that hung above her, dripping hope one drop at a time. Lynn brushed damp strands of hair off her daughter's forehead, whispering nonsense words, old lullabies, anything to fill the space between each of the child's breaths. The nurse returned a few minutes later with a clipboard. "We just need a signature for the billing," she said gently, as if already knowing the answer. Lynn's fingers froze halfway to the pen. She didn't need to read the numbers. She understood bills and what they did to people like her. Shame rose hot behind her eyes as she slowly, almost imperceptibly, pulled her hand back. Before she could speak, Kai stepped closer. "I'll handle it," he said calmly, taking the clipboard. Lynn's head snapped up. "No," she protested, voice raw. "I can't let you do that. We don't even know you. You've done too much already. I'll find a way to—" "Lynn," he interrupted gently, using her name without asking when she'd given it. Maybe she'd whispered it earlier. Maybe he just heard more than she intended to say. "Don't worry about the bill. Just stay with your daughter." "But why?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, small and aching. "Why are you doing this?" He studied her for a second, then shrugged lightly, almost as if the answer were obvious. "Because I can," he said, "and because someone should have done it for you a long time ago." The nurse, sensing this wasn't her moment, quietly left the room. Hours passed in a strange, suspended calm. The storm outside softened to a distant rumble. The world shrank to the pale blue curtain, the rhythmic drip of the IV, the soft beep of the monitor. Lynn sat glued to the bedside, too afraid to close her eyes. Kai kept his distance, seated in the corner chair, coat folded on his lap, eyes occasionally drifting to his phone but never really leaving them. He didn't talk unless she did. He didn't fuss or tell her to rest. He was simply there, like a solid wall against the chaos, taking up space without taking anything from her. When Misa's breathing finally grew steady and the fever began to fall, Kai rose from the chair and walked closer. "You don't have anywhere to go after this, do you?" he asked quietly. No judgment in his tone, just fact. Lynn stared at the white sheet, at the small hand beneath it. Her silence was answer enough. "You and your daughter can stay with me for a while," he said. "Just until she's fully better. I have space. It's warm. It's safe." Lynn's instincts screamed at once. "No, it's too much. You can't trust this. Kindness always has a price." But Misa shifted in her sleep, curling closer to her, face finally free of pain. The thought of carrying her back into the cold, into the streets, into the storm-washed night made Lynn feel physically ill. Her voice cracked. I don't want to be a problem for you. You're not, he replied. This is just an offer. No strings attached. You can say no. She lifted her gaze slowly to his, searching his face one more time for the hidden trap. All she saw was a tired man who looked like he'd also survived his own brand of storms. Is it really okay? She whispered. His answer was a simple nod. Somewhere between fear and relief, something fragile loosened inside her. Something that felt a lot like the beginning of trust. The gates to Kai's home opened with a quiet hum, revealing a driveway lined with trees still dripping from the storm. Their branches, stripped bare by the season, gleamed with beads of water that caught the faint streetlights like tiny lanterns. At the end of the path stood a 2-story house, modern but not ostentatious, its windows glowing with warm, golden light. It looked less like a mansion and more like a place where someone actually lived, where laughter could echo down the hall. In the passenger seat, Lynn sat rigid, Misa sleeping in her arms, cheeks now a healthier pink. The contrast between the hospital's harsh brightness and this gentle warmth felt surreal. To someone who had spent months counting cracks in underpass concrete, this house might as well have been another planet. Kai stepped out and walked around to her side, opening the door with quiet care. He didn't speak, just offered his hand again, steady and patient. She shifted Misa carefully, then took it, letting him help her down onto the smooth stone of the driveway. Inside, the warmth embraced her immediately. The entryway was softly lit, the walls painted a calm, creamy color. The floor beneath her was smooth wood, a woven rug stretching down the hallway. From somewhere deeper in the house drifted the faint, comforting scent of something simmering. Tomato, garlic, herbs. A smell that reminded Lynn of kitchens where people belonged. She froze just inside the threshold, suddenly hyper-aware of everything. The mud caked to her feet, the frayed cuffs of her jeans, the way her damp hair clung to her cheeks. This place was clean, ordered, whole. She felt like a stain on it. You can take off your shoes if that's more comfortable, Kai said softly, gesturing toward a small wooden rack by the door. Guest bathroom is right there if you want to wash up a bit. I'll find something dry for your daughter. His words were an invitation, not a command. Lynn stared down at her worn sandals, then slowly nudged them off, placing them neatly at the edge of the rug as if afraid they might dirty it simply by being close. The feel of the soft fabric under her bare feet made her throat tighten. Before she could move toward the bathroom, light footsteps pattered from the staircase. A small boy, around 6, with dark, slightly messy hair and curious brown eyes peered around the banister. He held a toy car in one hand and had the look of someone who had just been pulled out of a dream. That's Anne, Kai said with a gentle smile. My son. And patted closer, looking first at Lynn, then at the bundle in her arms. Is she okay? He asked, voice open, unfiltered by adult caution. Lynn blinked, surprised. She's just very tired, she answered quietly, but she's better now. Anne studied Misa for a long second, then seemed to reach some private conclusion. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, holding out his toy car, bright red paint chipped from years of love. She can have it, he said simply. She looks like she needs a friend. For a moment, Lynn forgot how to breathe. No pity, no staring. Just a child sharing with another child because that was what children did. She crouched a little so Misa, now stirring, could see him. Misa, she murmured. Look, someone brought you something. Her daughter's eyes fluttered open, still heavy with sleep. She saw Anne, saw the car, and a tiny smile tugged at her lips. Her hand emerged from the blanket, reaching for the toy. Anne's face lit up as if he'd just solved something important. The moment hung there between them. Simple, quiet, precious. Dinner that night felt like walking through a memory that didn't belong to her. Kai set plates on the table, spaghetti, meatballs, a bowl of salad, warm bread resting in a basket. Lynn sat on the edge of the chair, shoulders tight, fingers knotted in her lap. It felt wrong to sit at a table that wasn't a shelter's metal surface or a park bench. You don't have to eat if you're not ready, Kai said, Jikin Azad, taking his own seat. But the food's here if you want it. I'm not really hungry, she murmured automatically. Years of scarcity training her to say it, to step back, to leave more for others. Beside her, Misa had no such hesitations. The moment a small plate was placed in front of her, she picked up her fork with both hands and began eating with fierce concentration, sauce quickly decorating her cheeks. Kai caught Lin's eye and gave a half smile. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "It's okay to eat." Something in his tone loosened the knot in her throat. Slowly, she lifted her fork, feeding Misa a few bites before bringing one to her own mouth. The warmth of the food spread through her chest, unfamiliar and comforting and almost painful in its kindness. She chewed slowly, as if her body had forgotten what it meant to receive without earning. When they finished, Lin automatically stood, gathering plates by instinct. "Let me help with the dishes," she said quickly. "It's the least I can do." Kai shook his head, already reaching for the stack. "You don't have to," he replied. "You've done more than enough today." She looked at him, thrown. "I haven't done anything." He glanced toward the living room where An and Misa sat on the rug, quietly rolling the toy car between them. "You kept her alive," he said softly. "That's not nothing." The words landed somewhere deep, in a place nobody had spoken to in a long time. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Not as a problem, not as a mistake, but as a mother who had done everything she could. Later, in the guest room, Lin sat on the edge of a soft bed that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and sunlight. Fresh sheets, a small bedside lamp casting a gentle glow, a folded blanket at the foot. Misa lay curled beside her, clutching An's toy car like a treasure. Outside, the storm had finally exhausted itself. The night was quiet, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Lin stared at the ceiling, hardly daring to move. "Maybe just one night," she whispered into the darkness, more to herself than anyone. "One night we can sleep like normal people." She lay down slowly, one arm draped protectively over her daughter. For the first time in a very long time, the fear didn't follow her immediately into sleep. Exhaustion finally did what mercy had not, and she drifted off in a house that did not belong to her, feeling, just for a moment, like she might not always be on the outside looking in. Morning arrived softly, like it was apologizing for the night before. Pale light slipped through the curtains of the guest room, painting quiet lines across the floor. For a moment, Lin didn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft, the air too still, and Misa's breathing, slow and even beside her, sounded almost unreal. Then it all returned. The storm, the clinic, the stranger with kind eyes, the house that was not hers. Sleep had been shallow. Gratitude and fear had tangled together in her chest until she couldn't tell one from the other. When Misa sighed in her sleep, clutching An's toy car against her chest, Lin pressed a kiss to her daughter's forehead, checking for fever with a nurse's instinct that refused to die. Warm, but not burning. Better. Unable to rest any longer, she slipped quietly out of bed. Her bare feet met the polished floor, and she moved through the hallway with the silent familiarity of someone used to not being noticed. In the kitchen, she paused at the doorway. The space was tidy, almost too tidy. Counters clean, dishes stacked neatly, everything in its place. Her hands needed something to do. Anything. She washed the few cups in the sink even though they were already rinsed. She wiped the spotless counters again, watching the sunlight grow brighter through the window as it lit up the tidy backyard. A small garden, a swing, a patch of grass. It was the kind of yard she used to sketch in the margins of her notebooks when she was still planning a future. Eventually, she found eggs, bread, and milk. Without thinking, she moved like she had in the student kitchen at nursing school, cracking eggs into a bowl, whisking, heating a pan. The sound of butter sizzling grounded her. She toasted slices of bread, warmed milk in a pot, placing 2 small mugs near the edge of the table. None of this would ever repay what Kai had already done, but at least she wouldn't be useless. She was stirring the eggs one last time when a voice came from behind her. "You're up early." Lin jumped, nearly dropping the spatula. She turned to see Kai, leaning against the doorway, hair slightly tousled, sleeves pushed up, watching her with a look that was more curious than surprised. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, cheeks flushing. I wanted to help. I didn't want you to think I was taking advantage." He shook his head slowly, stepping into the room. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "You and Misa being here isn't some debt you have to pay off with chores." She looked down at this pan, embarrassed. "I feel better when I'm useful." Kai studied her for a moment, then offered a small, understanding smile. "Then cook if it makes you feel better," he said gently, "not because you have to." Later, after breakfast, the house filled with softer sounds. Anne and Misa sat on the living room rug with a pile of mismatched blocks between them. They built towers that leaned dangerously, laughed when they collapsed, and immediately started again. Anne showed Misa how to race the toy car down the side of a stack. She clapped every time it reached the bottom. From the armchair, Kai watched them with quiet eyes. The sight tugged at something deep inside him. A room lit by similar sunlight, a woman's laughter, the memory of a baby that never got to breathe. For a moment, the storm from his own past crashed back over him. A late-night phone call, tires on wet asphalt, headlights in the dark, sirens that came too late. His jaw tightened. He blinked, forcing himself back into the present. On the rug, Misa squealed as Anne handed her the car again. Her braceletless wrist, her small fingers, her unsteady joy. All of it felt like a second chance he hadn't asked for but had somehow been given. That night, after the children were asleep, Lynn found herself at the kitchen table with a mug of tea cupped between both hands, steam rising against her face. Kai poured himself coffee and sat across from her. They didn't speak at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was simply full. Finally, she broke it. "I was in nursing school," she said, staring into the tea. "Top of my class, full scholarship. I thought I had everything figured out." Kai didn't interrupt. He just listened. "I fell in love with someone who looked at me like I was the whole world," she continued, her voice wobbling. "Until I told him I was pregnant. Then I became a problem he didn't want." She gave a bitter little smile. "After that, it all unraveled. Rent, tuition, food. It felt like I was drowning in numbers I couldn't fix." She swallowed, knuckles whitening around the mug. "And now I'm here, in a stranger's house, hoping I haven't made another mistake." "You haven't," Kai said. His words were simple, but they didn't sound careless. She forced herself to look up. His gaze was steady, unflinching. "You're stronger than you think, Lynn," he said quietly. "Most people would have given up long before a night like that storm." Something in her loosened, just a little. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that surviving didn't make her a failure. It made her fierce. The peace, like most fragile things, didn't last long. Around 2 a.m, the house lay deep in silence. The kind of silence that sinks into the walls and makes every small sound feel louder. Lynn slept lightly, as she always did, one arm draped over Mia so that any shift would pull her instantly awake. It was a soft whimper that did it. Barely more than a sigh, but it sliced through the quiet and straight into her chest. Lynn jolted upright. In the dim glow from the hallway nightlight, she could see Misa's face pinched with discomfort, her breathing fast and shallow. Lynn pressed her palm against her daughter's forehead and felt it, heat, fierce and relentless. "No," she whispered, blood draining from her face. "No, no, no." Her mind flooded with images. Hospital corridors, numbers on screens, the way doctors' tones changed when they were worried. She scooped Misa into her arms, the girl's small body radiating fever, and stumbled out into the hallway. "Kai!" Her voice cracked on his name. "Kai!" His door opened almost immediately. He was already dressed, as if he hadn't really been sleeping at all. His eyes went straight to Misa, reading the panic in Lynn's posture even before she spoke. "She's burning up again," Lynn gasped. "Her breathing, it's wrong. I can't lose her. I can't." Kai stepped forward and gently took Misa from her arms, holding the girl close, checking her forehead with the back of his hand. "Get your coat," he said calmly, though his jaw was tight. "We're going now." Outside, the rain had returned. Not the wild violence of the storm, but a steady drizzle that tapped against the windshield like impatient fingers. The world beyond the headlights was a blur of wet streets and dim lamps. Lynn sat in the back seat, one hand gripping the edge of Misa's blanket, the other pressed against the window. "Please," she whispered into the darkness to no one in particular, "please don't take her from me. I don't care about anything else." At the hospital, the staff moved quickly, their faces drawn with fatigue but practiced. A nurse checked vitals, adjusted the oxygen, and spoke reassuring words that barely reached Lynn's ears. The doctor explained that it was a spike from a lingering infection, scary but manageable with treatment. "She's going to be okay," he said, the same phrase as before, but tonight it felt like a lifeline thrown into a black sea. Lynn sank into a plastic chair beside the bed, hands limp in her lap. She watched the IV drip, the gentle rise and fall of Misa's chest, the tiny flare of her nostrils with each breath. Tears slid soundlessly down her face, soaking into the collar of her borrowed sweater. Kai stayed too. He took the chair on the other side, close enough to be there, far enough not to crowd her. He didn't pull out his phone, didn't check the time, didn't complain. He simply sat, shoulders squared, as if his presence alone could hold the walls up. At some point, without meaning to, Lynn's head tipped sideways and landed lightly on his shoulder. She tensed, ready to jerk away, but exhaustion was heavier than embarrassment. Kai didn't move. He just shifted slightly so her neck would rest more comfortably, eyes staying on the little girl between them. They didn't speak. Words felt too small for what lay in the space between the three of them. The fear, the gratitude, the raw, shared quiet. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm, the fluorescent lights hummed, and time blurred at the edges. It wasn't love. Not yet. It wasn't some dramatic rescue scene from the stories people like to tell. It was something quieter. Two adults who had learned how to survive their own storms, sitting side by side in a too-bright room, keeping watch over a child who had somehow become the fragile center of both their worlds. When the worst of the fever finally passed and Misa's brow cooled beneath Lynn's fingers, a different kind of silence settled over them. Not anxious, not empty, just healing. Lynn lifted her head slowly, eyes red but clearer. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice hoarse. Xiai shook his head. "You don't have to," he replied. "Just let her grow up. That's thanks enough." She looked at him then, really looked. At the tired lines around his eyes, the grief that lingered there like an old scar, the gentleness he tried so hard to hide. For the first time, she wondered what storms he had walked through to reach this room. And quietly, somewhere deep inside, she began to believe that maybe broken people could still build something good together. It was the kind of morning that passed almost unnoticed. The sky was pale, the house quietly busy with small routines. Ann had overslept, lost track of his homework, and nearly forgot his lunch. Kai just laughed softly, ruffled his son's hair, and said, "Come on, I'll drive you today. We'll make it on time." Lynn watched from the hallway as father and son rushed out, and waving at her through the doorway, Misa pressed sleepily against her side. It was a simple moment, shoes half-tied, a quick goodbye, but it felt strangely precious, like something fragile she wasn't sure she was allowed to touch. With the house suddenly emptier, she slipped into the kitchen to tidy up. She washed their cups, wiped crumbs from the table, folded the dish towel just so. The quiet felt different without Anne's chatter and Kai's steady presence. Too big, too echoing. She tried to push away the creeping thought that this wasn't really her space, that she was only borrowing someone else's life. She was rinsing a plate when the front door opened. Footsteps, confident, heavier than Kai's usual stride. A man in a tailored shirt and loosened tie stepped inside, glancing around like he already knew the place. He spotted her in the kitchen and paused, one eyebrow lifting. "Oh," he said, "Papa SS, you must be her." Lynn straightened slowly, clutching the plate a little too tightly. "I'm just helping out," she said quietly. The man walked closer, leaning casually against the counter, eyeing the remnants of breakfast, the toys on the living room floor, the faint evidence of a life that had started to spread. "I'm Nam," he said, "old friend of Kai's." His tone was smooth, practiced. "We go way back." She nodded, unsure what to say. Nam's gaze slid toward the hallway, then back to her. "So, this is true, huh?" he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Storm rolls in. Homeless girl with a kid shows up, and now she's... What, staying here?" He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Kai always did have a soft spot, but this feels convenient." The word landed like a stone, convenient. He didn't realize she heard every syllable. His voice wasn't loud, but the kitchen carried sound too well. Lynn felt her grip loosen. The plate slipped from her fingers into the sink with a dull clink. Heat flooded her face. Suddenly, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. She turned away before he could see her expression and walked quickly down the hallway. Her steps were silent, but every beat of her heart was thunder in her ears. Upstairs in the small guest bathroom, she locked the door and stared at her reflection. Pale skin, tired eyes, clothes that didn't fit quite right, a stray thread hanging from her borrowed sweater. She looked like exactly what Nam had said. Someone who didn't belong. Someone who had wandered into a life that wasn't hers. Maybe he's right, she thought, fingers clutching the edge of the sink. Maybe they'll never see you as anything but a burden. Maybe you don't fit anywhere. Her breath hitched. She pressed a trembling hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. In the other room, Misa played with An's car on the bed, humming softly, unaware that her mother's heart was breaking again. That evening at dinner, Kai mentioned casually, "Nam dropped by today. I hadn't seen him in a while." Lynn's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "I didn't realize you two talked about me," she said, voice too light to be casual. Kai frowned. "We didn't. Why would you think that?" She shook her head, forcing a small, brittle smile. "It's okay. I get it. I'm just trying not to be a problem." He opened his mouth to say more, but Anne bounded into the room with a drawing to show him, and the moment dissolved into crayons and laughter. The conversation never finished, but the words had already finished something inside her. That night, when the house finally settled into sleep, Lynn sat on the edge of the guest bed watching Misa breathe. She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead, then quietly began to pack the few things they had. A borrowed sweater, a scarf, a small bag with almost nothing in it. In the kitchen, she found a scrap of paper and a pen. Her hand shook as she wrote, "Thank you for giving my daughter warmth when we needed it most. We will never forget your kindness. But we shouldn't stay. I'm sorry. Lynn." She placed the note beside Kai's mug on the counter, where she knew he'd see it in the morning. Then she wrapped Misa carefully in her old scarf, lifted her onto her back, and slipped out the front door into the cold, gray pre-dawn. She didn't look back. The house felt wrong the moment Kai stepped into the kitchen the next morning. The usual small sounds were missing. No soft clatter of dishes, no quiet humming from the stove, no little giggles from down the hall. The silence was too clean, too complete. He reached for his mug automatically, then froze when he saw the folded note beside it. His name was not on it, but somehow he already knew it was for him. He opened it, eyes scanning the short lines once, then again, as if repetition might change the meaning. "We shouldn't stay." His chest tightened. "Lynn," he whispered, the word barely a breath. On the stairs, Anne appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Ba, where's Misa? Where's Colin?" Kai knelt down, still gripping the note. His voice was steady, but his heart pounded in his throat. "They went out," he said quietly, "but I'm going to find them and bring them home. Home." The word slipped out before he could stop it, and he realized with a jolt that it was true. They weren't just guests anymore. Somewhere along the way, they had become part of the space that now felt painfully empty. He grabbed his keys and left without even taking his coat. Outside, a fine drizzle misted the air, more like breath than rain. The city was just beginning to wake, vendors rolling up metal shutters, buses sighing at corners, motorbikes weaving through sleepy intersections. Kai drove through streets he hadn't visited in years. He checked every shelter he knew, every bus stop where someone might try to disappear. He stopped at the small church on the corner of Haibatrung, at the park where the benches were always full on cold mornings. Nothing. With each empty place, the knot in his stomach tightened. He pictured Lynn's bare feet on wet pavement again, Misa's small body pressed against her back, the old fear in her eyes. Eventually, he pulled into a mostly deserted parking lot near an old playground. The swings moved lazily in the breeze, chains creaking. He didn't get out. His hand stayed locked on the steering wheel as he stared through the windshield at nothing in particular. "Please be safe," he murmured into the quiet car. "Both of you, please." He didn't know how long he sat there, the drizzle tapping on the glass like a ticking clock. The world outside brightened slowly, the gray giving way to a softer, more forgiving light. Finally, he forced himself to keep driving. Block after block passed in a blur of shuttered storefronts and narrow alleys. Then, as he turned onto a quieter street lined with old shops, he saw them. Under the overhang of a closed bakery, huddled against the brick wall, sat Lynn. Her hair hung in damp strands around her face, eyes closed, head tipped back against the bricks as if sleep had ambushed her there. Misa was curled in her lap, wrapped in Lynn's coat, thumb resting near her lips, breath soft and even. Kai pulled over so quickly the tires splashed against the curb. He stepped out into the drizzle, not bothering with an umbrella. The closer he walked, the more real they became. No longer a fear in his mind, but two fragile bodies on cold concrete. He knelt beside them and gently slipped his coat from his own shoulders, draping it over theirs like a shield. "You don't have to run anymore," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. Lynn stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion flickering across her face before recognition settled in. She jerked upright, tightening her arms around Misa. "Kai, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to be a burden." He crouched lower until his eyes were level with hers. Rain beaded in his hair, slid down his jaw, but he didn't seem to notice. "You weren't," he said firmly. "Not for a single second." She looked away, shame burning hotter than the cold. "You didn't take advantage of me, Lynn," he continued, his voice gentler now. "You reminded me what kindness looks like. And laugh again because of your little girl. This house, it's been lighter since you arrived." Tears filled her eyes, spilling over before she could blink them back. She bowed her head, shoulders shaking silently. Between them, Misa stirred. She blinked up at Kai with sleepy eyes, then turned to her mother, voice small and hoarse. "Mommy, Mr. Kai found us," she whispered. "Maybe he's the daddy from the stories you read." The words fell into the air like a quiet thunderbolt, soft, innocent, devastating. Lynn pressed a hand over her mouth as a sob tore free, her entire body trembling. Kai's throat tightened. He placed a steady hand on Misa's back, as if anchoring all three of them to this moment. "Come back with me," he said finally, eyes on Lynn. "Stay as long as you want. Let me help you go back to school. You were born to be a nurse. Let me give you that chance, not because I pity you, but because I believe in you." She searched his face, looking for strings, for hidden terms, for any sign that this was too good to be true. All she saw was tired honesty and stubborn hope. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold, but the grip was sure. "Maybe," she whispered, voice shaking but alive. "It's time to start again." Kai smiled, relief softening every sharp line in his face. He lifted Misa gently into his arms, holding her as if she'd always belonged there. Lynn stood beside him, still trembling, but for the first time in a long time, the world didn't feel like it was pushing her away. Together, they walked back toward the car, the drizzle easing as a thin ray of sunlight broke through the clouds. Life didn't change overnight. It didn't suddenly become easy just because the skies cleared and they drove away from that cold strip of sidewalk. But something shifted, quiet and undeniable, like the way dawn creeps in through a half-open curtain. Days took on a shape of their own. In the mornings, the house filled with small rituals. Ann and Misa sat at the table together, sharing bread and jam, arguing cheerfully over which cartoon character was the bravest. Lynn poured warm milk into mugs, always checking Misa's forehead with a gentle touch. The sharp edge of fear never completely left, but it loosened day by day. Kai went back to work. Video calls, spreadsheets, quiet conversations behind his office door about investments and plans that spanned years. He was still the man with more money than he knew what to do with. Still the one people called successful in hushed, admiring tones. But his evenings were no longer defined by empty rooms and unanswered questions. Now they were filled with homework, shared dinners, and the sound of little feet racing down the hallway. True to his word, he helped Lynn enroll in night classes at a nearby college. It wasn't the same nursing program she'd abandoned, but it was a bridge back to that world. Transfer credits, prerequisites, slowly rebuilding what had been torn apart. The first time she sat at a classroom desk again, pen hovering over a blank notebook page, her hands shook. She wasn't the same girl who had once believed the future would unfold neatly, but she was still capable of learning, of trying, of hoping. During the day, when Misa wasn't at preschool, Lynn kept busy in the house. No one asked her to. She did it because doing nothing still terrified her. She folded laundry with careful hands, cooked simple meals, helped Anne review his spelling, read picture books to Misa on the couch until the little girl fell asleep against her. The house began to hold traces of her careful organization in the pantry, her handwriting on sticky notes, the scent of her cooking in the evenings. Sometimes, when she came back late from class, tired but glowing faintly with the satisfaction of understanding something new, she would find a thermos of coffee and a wrap sandwich waiting on the counter. Always fresh, always still warm. One night, she picked it up with a small, disbelieving smile and asked, "Do you make these?" Kai, sitting at the table with his laptop, looked up as if surprised by the question. A faint, crooked smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe the coffee fairy stopped by," he said. Lynn laughed, a soft, rusty sound that still felt new. "Well, tell her she has really good timing," she said, tucking the sandwich into her bag. He just nodded, but his eyes followed her a little longer than usual as she slipped on her shoes and whispered goodnight to the sleeping children. Misa and Anne became inseparable, their bond as natural as breathing. They invented a secret handshake. They built forts out of blankets in the living room and declared them no grown-ups allowed zones. Sometimes they called each other best friend, other times almost brother and almost sister, as if the language hadn't quite caught up with what they'd become. One evening, as they sat on the floor drawing, Misa leaned against Lynn's knee and asked, "Mommy, do storms always mean something bad?" Lynn watched the crayon move in her daughter's hand, leaving bright lines across the paper. "Not always," she said quietly. "Sometimes storms wash things away so new things can grow." Misa nodded thoughtfully, as if this made perfect sense. "Like how the rain brought us here?" she asked. Lynn's throat tightened. She glanced toward the kitchen, where Kai stood rinsing dishes, sleeves rolled up, shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been before. "Yeah," she whispered. "Something like that." Misa's 4th birthday arrived without fanfare. No big party, no expensive decorations, no crowd of guests who barely knew her name. Just the 4 of them, a simple dinner, and a cake that leaned a little to one side because Anne insisted on helping with the frosting. A week before, Kai had asked his son, "If you were Misa, what would make your birthday special?" Anne didn't hesitate. "Something she can keep forever," he said, "like magic you can wear." So, every night after the kids were asleep, Kai disappeared into the garage. Not to work on a deal, not to answer emails, but to sit at a small workbench with a handful of wooden beads, soft yarn, and a single silver charm he'd had engraved. His hands weren't used to this kind of work. The bracelet wasn't perfect. The beads didn't line up exactly. But it was made with a care that no store-bought gift could match. On the morning of her birthday, after breakfast, he knelt in front of Misa. "I have something for you," he said, holding out a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. Misa took it with both hands, eyes wide. She peeled back the paper slowly, as if worried she might hurt it. Inside, nestled in a bit of tissue, was the bracelet. Soft yarn, smooth wooden beads, and at the center, a small silver charm that caught the light. On it were engraved the words, "To the bravest little girl I know." For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her fingers traced the charm, then the beads, then the charm again. She looked up at Kai, her lower lip trembling slightly, eyes glossy with something she didn't fully understand. "Do you like it?" he asked, suddenly unsure. Instead of answering, Misa lunged forward and threw her arms around his neck. Her small voice was muffled against his shoulder, but the word was clear. "Daddy." Silence followed, a deep, stunned, sacred kind of quiet. At the edge of the room, Lynn froze. The air seemed to leave her lungs all at once. It was the first time Misa had called anyone that. She hadn't planned for it, hadn't rehearsed it. It wasn't something Lynn had ever dared suggest. For a fragile second, she felt a sharp ache of everything she'd lost, of the life she'd once imagined. Then she saw the way Kai's arms folded around Misa, steady and sure, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this exact wait. And the ache shifted into something else, something warmer. There was no jealousy in her, only gratitude so deep it almost hurt. That night, after the candles had been blown out and the dishes washed, Lynn tucked Misa into bed. The bracelet glinted softly on the little girl's wrist. Even in sleep, her fingers curled protectively around the charm. Lynn sat on the edge of the bed, watching her daughter breathe, the rise and fall of her chest no longer a constant battle. She leaned down and whispered into the darkness, "If there's anyone I trust to be your hero, it's him." Time moved the way it always does when people aren't watching it too closely. Months blurred into a year. One late afternoon, the 4 of them sat in a quiet park, the sky painted gold by the sinking sun. A checkered blanket lay on the grass, a picnic half finished on top of it. Anne and Misa chased each other in circles, the bracelet bouncing on her wrist as she laughed. Lynn sat on a nearby bench, a warm cup of coffee between her hands. Her hospital ID badge, Lin Tran RN, peeked from her bag, a quiet testament to the life she'd fought her way back to. Full-time nurse, full-time mother, something more, though she didn't dare name it yet. Kai handed her a fresh cup, sitting down beside her. His gaze followed the children, his expression soft. "You look happy," he said. "I am," she replied, surprised by how true it felt. "I never thought I'd say that again after everything." He watched her for a moment, then murmured, "Maybe storms aren't meant to destroy us. Maybe some of them just push us where we're meant to go." She turned to look at him, eyes shining faintly. "You really believe that?" He shrugged, a small, lopsided smile tugging at his mouth. "You're here, aren't you?" Before she could answer, Misa came racing toward them, dragging On by the hand. Her cheeks were flushed, hair wild, eyes bright. She stopped in front of them, breathing hard. "Mommy," she asked, tilting her head, "are we a real family now?" Lin's breath caught. Words tangled in her throat. Before she could struggle for an answer, Kai's hand came to rest gently on her shoulder, warm and steady. No explanation, no speech, just presence, just choice. Lin knelt so she could look into Misa's eyes. "What do you think, sweetheart?" she asked softly, voice shaking just a little. Misa grinned. "I think yes," she said. Anne nodded firmly beside her. "We're like a team," he added. Kai laughed, ruffling his son's hair. They packed up slowly, the last rays of sunlight brushing their faces. As they walked across the grass and racing ahead, Misa holding Lin's hand, Kai falling into step beside them, the sky above them was clear, no trace of the storm that had once nearly swallowed their lives. Lin glanced up, watching the soft blue stretch endlessly over their heads. In the quiet of her heart, she thought, some storms take everything from you, but some bring you home. She squeezed Misa's hand, felt Kai's arm brush lightly against hers, heard An's laughter ringing out in front of them. And for the first time in a very long time, the future didn't terrify her. It felt possible, it felt chosen, it felt like family.